All right, let's talk about one of the most fascinating and frankly contradictory periods in English history, the Restoration. We're talking about the late 1600s, a time that gave us both this glittering, cynical, and super witty royal court, and at the exact same time, a blind Puritan poet writing one of the most serious religious epics of all time. So that brings us to the big question, the one that really frames this whole explainer. How on earth does a single historical moment produce two things that are so wildly different? It's a paradox, for sure, and it gets right to the very heart of what this era was all about. And this really lays it all out, doesn't it? You can see the two clashing worlds side by side. Over here, you've got the London stage. It's all about satire, climbing the social ladder, and the, let's say, loose values of the new court. And on the other side, you've got the universe of John Milton's Paradise Lost, a massive cosmic battlefield dealing with sin, damnation, and, just trying to justify God's entire plan. No big deal. So, here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll set the scene of this divided England. Then we'll look at the king's big return that really kicked everything off. From there, we're diving into the scandalous new theater scene, then into Milton's epic rebellion, and finally, we'll see how all this conflict ended up forging a new, modern nation. Okay, let's start with the core conflict of the age itself. And we're not just talking about a clash of ideas here. This was like a battle for the very soul of a nation that was still healing from a brutal civil war. Right. So it's super important to get this. This era wasn't just hitting the rewind button. The return of the king unleashed this massive backlash against a whole decade of really strict, really sober Puritan rule under Oliver Cromwell. Society was just desperate for some stability and honestly a bit of fun, which led to this incredible cultural whiplash. And to really get the art and the culture, you first have to understand the politics. Because that whole cultural explosion we're talking about, it was all triggered by one single massive political event. Yep, this is the moment. After years living in exile, King Charles II comes back to London in 1660, and it is the catalyst for everything. It's the end of this very austere Republican experiment and the beginning of an era that was pretty much defined by the king himself, who was notoriously self-indulgent and cynical, but also, a pretty sharp political survivor. But, just because the king was back didn't mean everything was suddenly peaceful. Far from it. As you can see here, the next few decades were incredibly turbulent. You had things like the Popish Plot, which was a totally fabricated conspiracy that sent the whole nation into a panic, and the Exclusion Crisis, which was this huge political fight to stop the king's Catholic brother from ever getting the throne. So, the new royalist parliament, they moved fast to lock down their power. These acts were all designed to do one thing: put control of the military and local government straight into the hands of the king and his allies. And the Act of Uniformity, that was all about making the Church of England dominant again, which pretty much shut out Catholics and other dissenters from having any role in public life. All right, with the political stage set, let's jump into the first of our two clashing cultural worlds. With the Puritans out and the party-loving king in, London's cultural scene just exploded. And you could see it nowhere better than on the stage. And this was a huge, huge deal. I mean, for more than 10 years, public theaters had been completely banned. So Charles II comes in and boom, he immediately licenses two official theater companies. And in what was a truly radical move, women were allowed to perform professionally for the first time, which changed English drama forever. So this new, dominant style of play that pops up is called the comedy of manners. These weren't plays about ancient gods or kings. No, they were about the fashionable and often pretty hypocritical high society of London itself. They were holding a mirror up to their own audience. And these plays, they had a very specific flavor. They were packed with sharp, clever dialogue, all focused on the romantic and financial drama of the upper class. The plots were famous for being these complex webs of affairs, disguises, and mistaken identities. And yeah, they absolutely reflected the cynical, pleasure-seeking values of the king's own court. Okay, so take a deep breath because we are about to do a complete 180. We're leaving the laughter and scandal of the London theaters and entering a much darker, much more serious world, the universe being built inside the mind of a blind, aging Puritan poet. The contrast here is just staggering. While all these new comedies are making fun of high society, John Milton, who, by the way, was a major figure in Cromwell's government, is now totally out of favor. He's blind, and he's pouring every last bit of his energy into creating his masterpiece, Paradise Lost. I mean, think about that goal for a second. His ambition couldn't have been more different from the playwrights. In an age of cynicism and political games, his stated goal was nothing less than this: to make sense of all of human history and suffering from God's point of view. That is an incredibly bold thing to attempt for a guy who was on the losing side of a civil war. And his vision of hell, wow, it's unforgettable. It's not just a place of fire. The flames actually give off no light, just enough to show you the horror. This idea of darkness visible is such a powerful symbol of spiritual blindness, what it feels like to be totally cut off from God, who is the source of all light and goodness. And at the heart of the poem's opening is Satan. And this quote right here captures his very essence. I mean, even after this catastrophic defeat, his first thoughts are of immortal hate and a flat-out refusal to admit that he's actually lost. In Satan, Milton creates this incredibly complex, charismatic, and just terrifyingly proud villain. You really see this complexity in the very first conversation in hell, between Satan and his second-in-command, Beelzebub. Satan is all heroic defiance, insisting that their will can't be conquered. But Beelzebub, he's a bit more of a realist. He's full of despair, and he's wondering if God only left them their minds so that their suffering would be even worse. So, we have these two completely opposite cultural products coming from the exact same time. How did this deep division ultimately end up shaping the future of the nation? Well, here's the thing. At the end of the day, both the comedies and the epic were really responses to the trauma of the Civil War. That conflict forced everyone to ask, what do you hold on to when the world completely falls apart? One path led to cynicism, to a witty, secular focus on just surviving the social game. The other path led to this deep spiritual questioning about the very nature of good and evil itself. And the legacy of this tense, contradictory time? It was immense. The political battles gave birth to the first real political parties, the Whigs and Tories, and it pushed England down the road toward a constitutional monarchy. At the same time, all this intellectual energy sparked the founding of the Royal Society, the rise of coffee houses as these hubs for public debate, and even the birth of the English novel. And that kind of leaves us with a final thought to chew on. The Restoration was an age of deep, often bitter, division. And yet, that very same conflict seems to have fueled this incredible explosion of creativity. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Is it the friction of a divided society that so often ends up producing the most powerful and lasting art,